My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence, a podcast that explores the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. We discuss the triumphs and failures that have shaped our lives and our leadership philosophies. I've found that it isn't whether we fail that defines us, but when we do fail, how we respond. Leaders dust off the ashes and use their failures as fuel to work harder and as lessons to come back wiser and stronger, more resilient, more determined, and more committed to excellence. Today I'm speaking with Christopher D. Kolenda, Ph.D., founder of the Strategic Leaders Academy. Dr. Kolenda works with leaders who want to apply insights from history and military operations to transform their businesses. A West Point graduate, recognized combat leader, and retired Army colonel, he defied conventional wisdom in Afghanistan by motivating a large insurgent group to switch sides, the only example of such success in the 20-year history of the war. As a trusted advisor to 3 four-star generals and 2 undersecretaries of defense, he became the first American to have both fought the Taliban as a commander in combat and negotiated with them in peace talks. He holds a Ph.D. in war studies from King's College London and is the author of Zero Sum Victory: What We're Getting Wrong About War. And one of the leadership books that really started me off on my leadership journey, Leadership, The Warrior's Art. It's a trusted anthology that's been in print for over 20 years and has helped tens of thousands of leaders succeed in combat and business. His unique warrior diplomacy has been featured in New York Times bestselling books and media outlets, including CNN, MSNBC, BBC, NPR, The Wall Street Journal, The Economist, The New York Times, and The Washington Post. So I'm honored to have you on the show. Thank you so much, Dr. Kolenda. Or do you go by Dr. Kolenda or
Yeah, Chris
Colonel?
is fine. Yeah, just Chris. Thanks, Dave. It's delightful to be on your program.
Thanks. Well, let's start off with where you were born and raised, and maybe some of your early influences that led you on this lifelong journey of service to others.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was born Omaha, Nebraska, and I was really kind of scrawny and awkward growing up. I wrestled in the 82-pound weight class in 8th grade and the 89-pound weight class as a freshman in high school. So being scrawny and awkward, it also made me a target for a lot of bullies. And of course, the harder I tried to fit in to avoid the bullies, the more awkward I got. And the bullying just sort of piled on. And yeah, middle school and the first 2 years of high school, like the 7th circle of hell for me. And I always wanted to put myself in a position where I'd never feel like that again. I had a great high school English teacher who kind of, she took in me and, a bunch of other misfits. And she was awesome. I, was accepted to West Point, and going there gave me that opportunity to not only make sure that I was never put in that kind of position again, but I could also help prevent other people from being in that position. And so that made the military pretty attractive to me. I didn't know how I would like the academy. I didn't know how I'd like serving in the Army. I wound up, I really, both brought me a lot of joy. They brought me some heartache too, but they also brought me a lot of joy. Yeah, I served in the military for 24 and a half years. One of those experiences was leading a force of about 800 paratroopers in Eastern Afghanistan in 2007 and 2008. 2007 was one of the deadliest areas of the country. 2008 was transformed, and that was because what our folks did out there was to motivate this insurgent group to stop fighting and switch sides. And that got a lot of people's attention. So I was asked to help the Obama administration write their new strategy. General McChrystal took me out with him to Afghanistan to be senior advisor. I stayed with him through his command through a few months of General Petraeus. And then the Secretary of Defense asked me to be his lead, his representative, personal representative in the talks we had with the Taliban in 2011, 2012. And so that meant declining a senior Army command, retiring from the military. So I served as a Department of Defense civilian for a couple of years. The talks didn't work out for a lot of different reasons. And so I resigned from the government in 2014, started my own consulting business. And, now I like to work with leaders who want to get good at getting better. And I do that through building an emotional connection with them, helping them increase their capacity and common sense accountability. I found those to be magic in terms of personal growth.
I'm curious to get a little more background. I know that your father was a veteran. He served in Vietnam, right? I think
No, he was a JAG officer that he didn't go to Vietnam. So I think he spent like 30 years as a SJA, retired as a colonel, which is awesome. And then my other brother, one of my brothers is also now a JAG officer in the Army Reserves as a colonel. So you got 3 colonels in the family. It's kind of cool.
Now, you talked about being kind of scrawny in your junior high school years. And did you wrestle your entire high school career?
Through junior year.
Through junior year?
Yeah.
And did you do any other sports?
I played baseball and I played tennis. So baseball was my jam. And I was a pitcher. So that was my thing. I wanted to play baseball in college. So initially I had no desire to go to military academy. And then I got a phone call. I think it was my graduation day from high school. Like, hey, you've been accepted to West Point. Do you want to go? It's from the senator's office. And I was like, if I go and I don't like it, I can always leave. It's my 18-year-old brain. If I go and I don't like it, I can always leave. But if I don't go, I'll always wonder, could I have made it? And so I was like, okay, yes, I'll go. I played baseball my freshman year in college, and then hurt my shoulder, and so I was washed up. And I took up boxing.
Yeah, I always feel like there's some parallel to a person's leadership development. When they've played team sports and just sports where they're the only person competing. There's those 2 types of lessons learned when you're working with a team and when you have to be self-reliant, when you're out there performing. There's always the lead up, the practice and working with other people to help develop. But I always think it's pretty cool to see how people develop in their early years, and then those skills kind of translate and get further developed later on in life. And then you go to one of the premier military academies in the world, and it's even more leadership development. After your time at West Point, what did your Army career look like until you ended up going over into combat?
Yeah, I tell you, I was very fortunate. I had just this series of just exceptional leaders from second lieutenant up to lieutenant colonel. It was awesome. And I was in a cavalry unit. In the cavalry, we pride ourselves on junior leader initiative, having lots of independent decision making. Of course, supporting the common good. so it's very different than maybe some organizations like, more infantry type organizations that, maybe are more regimented and lockstep. So I fit in perfectly, as a, sort of a natural misfit. The cavalry that was my jam. I really thrived there and enjoyed it. And then once I became a lieutenant colonel, I hit like a couple of toxic leaders. Oh my goodness, it was terrible. And then I was fortunate to fortunate to have the command and be in the command, leading this unit for 3 years. So 2 years before we went into combat, and then 15 months there. And that was a special organization with just a lot of really great people.
What was the catalyst that led you to write Leadership, the Warrior's Art?
Yeah, it first came out, as you mentioned, in 2001, right before 9/11. So it's like that summer. And I was at the University of Wisconsin going to graduate school, en route to teaching at West Point for 3 years in the history department. And I look on bookshelves for leadership stuff because I always enjoyed studying leadership. And there's a lot of like business leadership books. Some are good, some are complete rubbish, but there's not really any military leadership books outside of like biographies and autobiographies. And I thought, maybe I can make a contribution here. Yeah, nobody wants to read my autobiography. I was, a senior captain at that point. Rather uninteresting. But I'm going to a place where there's lots of people who have lots of experience. And oh, by the way, they've all been to graduate school. They got masters or PhDs, so they can write. And I bet I could put together a volume with a lot of different people's points of view. And so that's what I did. And I think the best way that you study leadership is you got to attack it from 3 angles. Theory, so understanding the big ideas, theory and philosophy, the big ideas about leadership, what really, wrestling with human nature and what moves the needle there. History, so looking at the history of leaders and organizations, both good and bad, and learning from that, and what you gain is perspective. And then contemporary experience, so how people are applying those leadership ideas today. People who are grappling with some of the same issues that you are. And I found that you got to have all 3, because if you just have theory and history, but no practical experience, then you run the risk of getting a lot of ivory tower solutions. It's like trying to make breakfast with a chocolate frying pan. It's not going to work. It's going to create a big mess. If you have theory and experience, but you don't have that historical perspective, then you are likely to fall hook, line, and sinker into all sorts of fads that are here today and gone the next. Now, I remember growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, we had the 1-minute manager, management by objective, management by walking around, as opposed to management by sitting on your butt. Yeah. And they were kind of here today and gone the next, and rightly so. If you have history and experience, but you don't have the theory, you don't have the big ideas, then you're in a tactical hamster wheel. You're not thinking about leadership strategically. And just like the person who's playing chess 1 move at a time, if you're up against somebody who knows the Queen's Gambit, you know who's going to win that match. So when you put all 3 together, what you have is a leadership discipline, a leadership course of learning that is going to help you think creatively, innovate, and soar to new heights.
Speaking on that book, before we started recording, we talked about there's a new edition, the 2nd edition of Leadership. So just reading some of the additions to it, I definitely got to get another copy. Can you talk a little bit about what you've added to create this 2nd edition?
Yeah. The 1st edition, I mean, it succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. So over 60,000 people are using it for their leader development programs. People that took the book with him into combat. A lot of the authors who were colonels at the time were wound up being 3- and 4-star generals. I mean, so you got some really talented people, really just high quality people that wrote chapters for this thing. So that was really gratifying. Last year, Publish and I were talking, and it's like, the book's done really well. A lot of things have changed since 2001. You've had of course, the global war on terror, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, all the different military deployments. You had the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You had all of, the combat exclusion end. So now all military occupational specialties are open to women. Various, the social unrest that we saw in the 2020s, et cetera. And it's like, why don't we update this thing? And why don't we add some new chapters to it? So the book is as relevant for the next 20 years as it was the previous 20 years. And so I streamlined a bunch of chapters, included some key takeaways and action steps for each one, to make it even more implementable. And then we added chapters on things like developing women as operational leaders. We added a chapter on how hazing and harassment and sexual assault damage unit readiness and cohesion. And then one of my captains from Afghanistan, who just retired as a colonel, and I wrote a book about some combat leadership lessons we learned in Afghanistan, or some leadership lessons that you can apply every day that we learned in combat. So yeah, so that's the new edition, just came out.
And so let's touch on Zero Sum Victory. The subtitle, What We're Getting Wrong About War.
Right.
But so it's very timely. I mean, it really, well, let's hear from you how it's applicable to today.
Sure. I had the good fortune, you mentioned going to King's College. So after I resigned from the government, I had the opportunity to go to King's College, and they wanted to put a practitioner on the faculty, and they said they'd waive the tuition on the Ph.D. I thought that was a pretty good idea. So I went and got after that. And I wanted to look at, so it was very therapeutic in some ways. I wanted to look at why the world's best military can't seem to win any wars anymore. What's going on there? And when you look at Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq, we have these big military interventions against ragtag militant groups, and we wind up getting trapped in these quagmires and having unsuccessful outcomes. So what is it that is creating these quagmires, these fiascos, these disasters? And what is it that we're doing? So this is an internal look. What is it that we're doing at the policy and strategy level that is increasing the risk that these wars are going to turn into disasters? Our soldiers, our Marines, our sailors, our airmen, they're going to do what they're told. They're going to do it to high standard. The military is really, really good. Oftentimes, we're not telling them to do the right things, and so this begins to snowball. And so what I found, and what's applicable to business today as well as to national security, is we tend to go into these conflicts with a sort of a mental model that says all wars must end in a decisive military victory. And so we develop these strategies that feel good to us, but have a very low probability of success. So, and there are plenty of businesses that have strategies that they develop that look good, but in the, as things evolve, they become increasingly problematic. We then have a hard time changing those strategies due to things like cognitive bias, so confirmation bias, status quo bias, loss aversion, all of these different things. Political and bureaucratic struggles, dramas, silos. bureaucratic silos. We have nobody in charge of our wars. I'll get to that in a minute. And relationship problems with the host nation. So in the academic literature, you'll call it principal agent problems, but it's like, your person on the ground is or your allies and partners are doing things that are serving their own interest naturally, not things that serve your interest. And so as they get more corrupt, in this case, it begins to really undermine the prospects of success. And then finally, decision-making wise, when a president finally says, okay, we're done with this, we're out of here, let's see if we can negotiate. Well, by then you've lost all your leverage. Once you announce your withdrawal, all your leverage is gone. And then you wind up in a situation where the enemy is not going to negotiate an end to the conflict with you, because they realize that their leverage is going to be much higher after you're gone, as an intervening power. And then the host nation's not going to negotiate with you. They're not going to reform, because what they want to do is keep you trapped there. They want to keep the gravy train going. So they're going to go kicking and screaming into any reform or talks. And that's how we get trapped in Afghanistan, a place like Afghanistan, for 20 years. So there's all sorts of business lessons that we can learn from, like the Afghanistan disaster, for instance. We can go there if you'd like. And what it means to us today.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'd really like to get some of your insight on, the leadership lessons that could be learned by looking at the leaders in Ukraine.
Well, that's a great one, because one of the biggest leadership lessons is that leaders have to be exemplars. They've got to model the behavior that they want everybody else to follow. When you go to a U.S. Civil War battlefield, for instance, you'll see a lot of people on horseback. And the reason why they rode horses into battle, leaders rode horses into battle, it's not because they were privileged or lazy. It's a little bit because they could see a little bit better. They're higher up, see a little bit better. But mainly is because they were the most vulnerable person on the battlefield. Everybody's shooting at you if you're on a horse. And if you're not on a horse, you're in front of your formation. You probably got a saber in your hand, and you've got your hat on top of it, and you're saying, follow me. You're the most vulnerable person in the formation. And the message is, if I can do my job, well, everybody's shooting at me. If I can model the behavior and the values that I want everybody in this formation to model, while everybody's shooting at me, you can too. In ancient warfare, some of the chapters in Leadership to Warriors are about ancient warfare, Alexander the Great. Leaders in those phalanxes, the leader was always on the right front. And the reason the leader was in the right front, because when you're in a shield wall, you're holding your shield. And so half your shield is covering you, and half of it's covering the person to your left. So you hold the shield in your left hand, which means that the person on the right front of the formation, they've got no shield to protect them. They're the most exposed person. And they're saying, I'm the leader. I'm going to be the most exposed, the most vulnerable person in this formation. And if I can do my job, I can stand my ground and fight. So can you. So let's compare and contrast Afghanistan and Iraq, in terms of the leadership. In Afghanistan, when the going got tough, Afghan leaders took the money and ran. When the going got tough in Ukraine, and people were offering Zelensky a way out, he said, I don't want to ride. I want more ammo. He was the exemplar. He rallied his people. The Afghan military just simply collapsed. When their leaders took the money and ran, everything collapsed around him. When Zelensky said, give me more ammo, the Ukrainian people rallied. He was willing to be the exemplar, and the Afghan leaders weren't. And the results were pretty striking.
You talk about difficult changes, tough decisions, but from a leadership perspective, how you gain buy-in for those difficult changes. Is this one of those, lead from the front examples? What are, what are the keys to gaining that buy-in?
Yeah, it's such an important idea. And it reminds me that there's no such thing as military leadership. There isn't. There's just leadership. There's this mythology that in the military, people are automatons and you give them orders regardless how ridiculous, and they'll follow them. That's not how it works in real life. I mean, you know that. You've got to gain buy-in. If you want to get people's discretionary effort, you've got to gain buy-in. Otherwise, they'll do everything that people in big organizations and bureaucracies do. You just get compliance, and that's it. So buy-in is vital. The reason why Joshua Chamberlain his unit was able to stand his ground at Little Round Top in day 2 of Gettysburg is because he gained the buy-in of 117 deserters. He was handed 117 deserters on the eve of the battle. And they nearly doubled, or they increased the size of his force by a third because he was able to gain buy-in. And 117 out of the 120 deserters that he was given stood their ground at Little Round Top. And had they not, Gettysburg would have turned out very differently. And it's because of buy-in. I think buy-in is a result of 3 factors. So you talk about it as a 3-legged stool, and you've got to have all 3 in place to have buy-in. So one of those is clarity about the common good. So people have to know what they're buying into. So being very, very clear about your mission and vision, your goals and values, your standards and expectations. When I work with leaders, I advise them on 2 things. First of all, you have to be able to describe your expectations so simply that an 8-year-old can repeat it back to you perfectly. Because if you can't do that, then it's probably too complicated and people won't know what to do. Second is use the formula what plus so that plus the results and outcomes that you want to achieve. So when you're giving a task or a mission or a requirement or a standard or a value, what it is, what we want to do, use the 2 words so that, and then talk about the results and outcomes that you want to achieve by doing that particular task. And what that does is arms people with the bigger picture. It arms people with, this is what we want to achieve by doing this. And so they'll know that if doing one thing is not going to get that result and outcome, that the result and outcome is the bigger part of it. It allows them to take initiative. It allows them to use discretion. It allows them to use their imagination. So clarity is number 1. The second is enlightened self-interest. So people have got to see themselves as better off by buying in, as opposed to resisting or slow rolling. And then third is accountability. People need to know what right looks like and the consequences. People need to know what awful looks like and the consequences. And people need to know what awesome looks like and the consequences of that. And so when you have all 3 in place in the line, you've got buy-in. Of course, if you're missing one of the legs, so if you're missing the clarity leg, people don't know what they're buying into, then you've just got self-interest, you got accountability. Then what you wind up getting are fiefdoms, where everybody's doing their own thing. And they're just operating in their own interest, not in the bigger picture. If you are missing the enlightened self-interest leg, then people might have clarity and there might be accountability, but if they don't see themselves as better off, then all you're going to get is compliance. You're not going to get discretionary effort. And then finally, if you are missing the accountability leg, then you're going to get backsliding. You're going to have inconsistent performance. So buy-in is when you're at the intersection of those 3, and the more clarity that you provide, the stronger people see themselves as better off. and consistent, when you have consistent accountability, then, that middle intersection of the Venn diagram, grows bigger and bigger, and your performance increases as well.
Earlier, when we were talking, you mentioned a nonprofit that you've put together, that you founded. I want to talk a little bit about that, but I want the listeners to, this is just really awesome having this conversation with you. I was handed your book years ago when I first started off in a leadership position, getting to talk to you, the person that put it all together, and and now talking about your new book, and then to find out that one of the things that you're passionate about is helping veterans. And it's one of the things that I talk about on this show quite frequently.
Sure.
And a lot of the people that listen to the show are veterans and first responders, a lot of whom are struggling with PTSD and the symptoms that come along with experiencing traumatic events. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your nonprofit, its mission, and what inspired you to create this organization.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. As I mentioned, 6 of my paratroopers were killed in action in Afghanistan back in 2007. So the names are Chris Pfeiffer, Adrian Hike, Jacob Lowell, Ryan Fritchie, Dave Boris, and Tom Bostic. And we're coming up on the 15-year anniversary of that deployment. And I wanted to do something special to acknowledge their service and sacrifice, and so part of that was I wanted to visit their graves. I could drive it. It's, they're buried, starting Nebraska all the way to Arlington National Cemetery. So it's almost due east from Nebraska. So I could drive it. That'd be kind of lame. I could walk it, but that's just going to take an exorbitant amount of time that I just can't do. So I said, I know, I can pedal a bike 1,700 miles. The only problem is I didn't have a bike. I hadn't ridden a bicycle in 20 years. So this is like April of 2021. I'm like, I ain't getting any younger. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it now. So plunked down, got a really nice road bike. I hired a cycling coach to get my butt in shape for this thing. And I started telling people so I don't chicken out. So, put my money where my mouth is. And then I also thought that, maybe this thing can actually do some good. Can use it as a fundraiser. And so I created the Saber 6 Foundation, which is named after, it's twofold me. It's named after the 6. And it was also my call sign in Afghanistan. And what the Saber 6 Foundation is all about is so the honor ride is about honoring the dead, and the Saber 6 Foundation is all about supporting the living. And it's designed to support our 800 paratroopers, their families and descendants, achieve their dreams. One of the challenges, you mentioned PTSD. I'm going to start a new thing, call it PTSN, post-traumatic stress normal, because you don't go through these kind of experiences without being affected by them, and one of the things that happens to military veterans, especially combat veterans, is happiness follows a U, according to a lot of studies, U curve. And at the top of the U on one side is like age 20-ish. And the other side is like age 60-ish. And then right in the middle, the bottom of the U is age 47.2, to be specific. And so most of the people who deploy to combat are in the 18 to 27-year-old category. So they're at the top of the happiness curve. And at the same time, they got this amazing sense of purpose. I'm defending my country. I'm in combat. I am fighting for my country and defending people back home. I've got this amazing sense of belonging. The person on my left and a person on my right has got my back. They get me, they got me, and they're going to be there for me. And then I've got the entire weight of the country behind me. That's pretty awesome. So a lot of people will look back on their time in combat, despite the heartache and despite the trauma, and say, these are among the happiest days of my life. And they leave that. And you find that I don't have that same sense of purpose anymore. I don't know if I belong. Nobody gets me out here in the civilian world. Nobody's got my back. Nobody knows how to help me. Now, for some people, they're able to make that pivot pretty quickly, find new purpose and belonging, and they're ready to soar to new heights. We want to be there to help them. There are other people whose their U curve is a bit steeper, bit deeper, and we want to help them flatten that U. Yeah, you might call it midlife crisis, where you get into kind of a funk around age 47.2. And we want to help them bounce back stronger, soar to new heights. And then there are people whose U curve is pretty steep. And at some point you cross a line where you get into depression, substance abuse, self-harm, and death by suicide. We've lost in the US military over 7,000 service members killed in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Over 30,000 post 9/11 veterans have died by suicide. Within my own unit, people who were with us in 2007 and 2008, we've now lost more to suicide and substance abuse than were killed in combat. We have one guy, one of our best non-commissioned officers, top 1 or 2% person, leader. He now lives in a dumpster outside of a city library in Northern California as a meth addict. And he's just one of several stories like that. And yeah, I know it's 15 years later, but I just can't know that this is happening and not do anything about it. I can't do it on my own, but I bet we can put together a foundation, and I bet we can do some awesome things to raise some money and be there when guys who are in that situation are ready to move forward. And so that's what this nonprofit's all about.
I really appreciate everything that you've done for our country, the service. 24 plus years serving in so many different capacities in the military, and now post service to the military, you've continued to commit your wisdom and your experience to helping others achieve more. I believe you do coaching, like professional development coaching too.
Yeah, that's
right?
exactly right. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, I'd like to help people, coaches, get good at getting better. And you get good at getting better. I help people when, we build an emotional connection together. I only work with people I can emotionally connect with. I help them build their capacity. If you're 1% better each day, in 70 days, you're twice as good. And then accountability, common sense accountability. So we're doing the right things the right ways. That's what I do. That's how I help people.
So for those listening, what's the best way for people to connect with you, to learn more about you, maybe to learn more about your nonprofit? I know that there's going to be a lot of people listening that are going to want to get your books. Can you give us all the links?
Yeah, of course. So the easiest way to get a hold of me is through the website, strategicleadersacademy.com. You'll see all the intellectual property and things like that. you can contact me at chris@strategicleadersacademy.com. I'm easily identifiable on social media. So if you just look for Chris Kolenda or Christopher Kolenda, you'll find me there. And the books are available where great books are sold. And then finally, if you want to learn more about the Honor Ride and the Saber 6 Foundation, you go to honorride.us. So honorride, one word, .us, not .com, but .us. And you'll be able to track my progress and different ways to support stuff like that. So that's how you can learn a bit more about all that.
Thank you so much for your service. Thank you for agreeing to spend this time with me, talking about your books and your experiences, and thank you for the work that you continue to do to make our country even better. So thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate the opportunity and what you're doing to help leaders get good at getting better.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on your favorite podcast platform and visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content. My goal is and always will be to add value to as many people as possible. So if I can be of any assistance to you or someone you know, please connect with me via email or on one of my social media accounts, linked on the homepage of my website. Remember, our failures don't define us unless we let them, and the only true measure of a leader is the success of their team.